but I suppose we should go ahead and get started. Okay, thanks for joining everybody. A couple housekeeping things up top, and bear with me because I haven't shared one of these yet, even though it's our third month in quarantine. We'll, right off the bat, we'll ask you to stay on mute on Zoom. Make sure you have mute enabled if you're not speaking. That'll simply protect us all from your background noise. And when we come to a point in the meeting where we're either asking for comment from members of the committee or for members of the public, we'll simply ask you to use the raise hand feature in Zoom to get in the queue. I know on the desktop, raise hand is in the participants pane. So if you select the participants pane, the raise hand button should be at the bottom and you would see the hand pop up next to your name. Not 100% sure how it works on other devices like an iPad or a phone. I think that's all the housekeeping. What you'll see on the agenda tonight is two different items. The first item is a presentation from the City Department of Transportation. They'll be bringing us up to date on some of the temporary bike lanes that have been installed on streets such as 38th and 39th crosstown bike lanes. The second item we'll go into a little bit more when we get to it, but it'll be a little bit more of a forum for various topics that haven't been discussed as part of other conversations related to the COVID crisis and its effect on various transportation and environment issues in our district. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we'll structure that conversation. But for now, I'd say let's go ahead and get started. Luke has queued up the DOT's presentation, and I invite the present members of the Department of Transportation to go ahead and get started.
Hello, my name is Sean Macias. I'm Deputy Director for the Department of Transportation. We prepared a short deck tonight just to discuss what we're pursuing here on 30th and 39th Streets as part of open streets and these temporary bike lanes. I think I'll pass it over to my colleague, Eileen Body. Eileen, are you on? I think I saw your name.
Yes, thank you, Sean.
Great.
I'm also on right now. I'm sorry, Eileen. Please, I want you to go through it, but I just wanted you to know Ted Wright's also here from the bike team. For some reason, it says Eileen under my name. That's not a picture of Eileen with the slick back hair.
Am I able to click through the slides, or does someone else have access to that?
I think Luke will be doing that. So if you just want to say next slide or kind of make a clicking sound.
Great.
That's right.
We'll take care of it.
Thanks so much. So like Sean said, we have a short deck. We want to share with you the progress we've made so far. We just started this on Friday and we still have some work to do. You can click to the next slide. So these were announced as temporary lanes with the mayor's initiative to expand the bike network during COVID. Just to highlight how this fits in with the existing bike network and the other crosstown lanes. We've recently installed other crosstown lanes on 26th, 29th, 52nd, and 55th. And so this pair sits right in the middle of those pairs of bike lanes. You can click to the next slide. We wanted to share some of the reasons why these streets were selected for the temporary version. So this map has a lot of information, but essentially these two streets have the advantages of continuing all the way across the island between 1st Avenue to 11th Avenue uninterrupted. They also do connect to the 1st Avenue bike lane, whereas some of the other streets do not. You can see on the map that some of these small red circles with a slash through them show where the streets don't connect through. So for example, Bryant Park, Madison Square Garden, Grand Central, these are some of the things that we looked at. There aren't any streets that go all the way through completely from the Greenway to 1st Avenue. but this is the best pair in terms of that continuity. Other things that we looked at were some of the street network challenges, specifically near the Queens Midtown Tunnel entry and exit points on the east side. And also on the west side, there are some challenges where there are access points to the Lincoln Tunnel and from the Lincoln Tunnel. And one last thing to mention is that these two streets have the advantage of having adequate width in order to fit a protected bike lane with parking on both sides, especially between 11th Avenue all the way to 5th Avenue, which is what we're working on so far. Next. So currently, the first phase of this temporary lane is 11th Avenue to 5th Avenue on both streets. There are some exceptions, but the majority of the blocks in that area currently have 2 travel lanes and 2 parking lanes. 39th Street has a shared lane in the westbound direction on most blocks. 38th does not. And so we just started this last Friday with the installation. You may have already seen some photos. There's some photos at the bottom of the slide here. Essentially what we are doing is using the second travel lane, the second one over from the left curb if you're riding down the street, the left side on both streets, and converting that second travel lane into a parking lane. This is a floating parking lane, which is somewhat similar to other setups that we've used on other protected bike lanes. And what we've done so far is place barrels along the corridors with various signage and some laminated signs to also educate drivers on how to park. What this does is it still allows for the single travel lane and also allows for loading to continue on both sides of the street. The bike lane is along the left side of each street. So on both 38th Street and 39th Street, it runs on the left side. As I mentioned, we just began this process on Friday. Some of the additional elements that we are going to follow up with include marking some of the lines so it's more clear where this floating parking lane is that people should be parking in, and also adding more signage. These are really long blocks, and so currently, we're working with some limited materials in terms of barrels and signs. We do plan to get out there, certainly with more signs, and then some markings to help clarify what is expected of drivers. And so the next slide just kind of summarizes, we've only just gotten started. We do plan to continue bringing some additional elements in as we work through implementation. This is really phase 1 in terms of the limits of the project between 11th Avenue to 5th Avenue. We do hope to expand this to the east side as a next phase, but we want to finish this one first and work through some challenges that we think we can resolve with some of the markings and signage.
I can speak to that, Eileen, a little bit. I hope people can hear me.
Yes, we can.
I can speak to that. We're dealing with a lot less staff than we usually are, and it's difficult to install things in Midtown as it is. So what we're really trying to do here is play a little bit of catch up, get what we can out right now with the materials that we have in a temporary situation. And basically, as we have markings and other elements get back online, like more barrels, and specifically, like that's a simple thing, but we still have to go out there and get those. These are things that we're going to be adding to the design and fortifying the lanes and making them more useful as time goes on. These always take time, and I think Eileen's been involved in every single Midtown crosstown lane that we've done, and I think right now we're moving rather quickly with these. And I just want to say that it's difficult given the timing, and we're trying to do what we can with the resources that we have. So yeah, with that, I can open up to questions, especially for Eileen. I'm sorry for jumping in there, you guys. I was having internet problems.
Okay. Thanks very much for that presentation. I do have one kind of clarifying question right off the bat. I'm wondering if you can clarify the timeline a little bit. Was this installation on these streets planned prior to the was this your plan before the COVID crisis happened at all? And did the crisis affect the timing of how quickly these were installed?
This is the streets that we were planning on doing. There was a lot of research put into it. I think with not only the materials, but also what's happening out on the street, we opted for a slightly different plan, and we want to come with our final plan to you guys on these same streets once we're at that point. So it is the same streets, slightly different plan. Easy answer to your question.
Okay, so you essentially accelerated the installation of a temporary version. Do you have a time frame for the more for the phased completion and then the more permanent reconfiguration?
Our hope is that we're going to continue to work with what we've got out there. We're going to take the temporary lanes that we have now, continue to fortify them, extend them out, increase their utility as you can get, especially over to the east side. There are some more difficulties on those streets. But then what we would do is come back to you guys and present the actual changes in curb regulations, all the real final changes that, that this isn't our first time doing this with you guys. We've done 26th and 29th, 52 and 55, and we had even a more complex presentation for these that was in the hopper, but we're not ready for it now. So this is kind of, we want to show that to you eventually, but a lot of that stuff, just to remind you guys that was a lot about curb regulations and making sure that the parking would work along the corridor. Right now, what we're installing here is a lot of parking space at the cost of some moving lanes because there's less traffic happening out there. It's a little bit ambiguous. It's hard to understand as a driver. And there's a lot of those businesses are trying to figure out where to park and such. But right now, basically the big thing that we're doing is just operating quickly, and we don't want to start taking away parking regs right now in the middle of a situation that we're in right now.
Hi, this
Okay.
is Kimberly from the Borough Commissioner's Office. I was just going to add to that the plan that we have is fairly developed, or at least it was prior to the COVID crisis, and so that is something that we could potentially come with to you fairly soon, but it's a matter of figuring out how that now fits with the context of all of the other things going on and with our capacity to actually implement projects.
Okay, that makes sense. And yeah, you guys have certainly come to us with those kind of proposals before, and we'll look forward to seeing the full thing as you envisioned it at some future meeting. Great, thank you. With that, I'll open it up to members of the committee who have any questions about what we've seen so far.
Just a reminder, please press the raise hand button if you have a question.
I saw Nancy first.
So my concern is my office is on 39th Street and 8th. And during normal traffic, those streets are packed with cars and trucks. So have you done traffic studies to see the volume during normal times? It sounds to me like this is going to be permanent, not temporary. So I need, tell me more about whether it's temporary or permanent.
Right now, the design right now is temporary. We are going to come back to you with a permanent solution that does address the massive amount of vehicles that do flow through that corridor. This is kind of what Kim was talking about a second ago, the idea that things are changed. People aren't moving along these corridors like they were. So we kind of put in a temporary treatment for right now, keeping parking in place, and it's kind of to be honest, it comes at the cost of vehicular lanes. That's probably, in terms of the way that our design was working before this, the vehicular lanes were more of a priority in it because of, you have the tunnel on one, you have tunnels on both ends. So does that help? I don't want to get too much into specifics. I will tell you though, and I wish I could show you all the work that we've done, because this has been something that Eileen and there's another person on the line, hopefully named Olguin, who've been hustling for basically years on this and looking at traffic volumes and trying to make it work in a way that's going to be the least detrimental to traffic and businesses along the corridor. So I look forward to giving you that in the future.
Okay, thanks. I saw Joel's hand next.
A quick question, a quick comment. The question, are both of these lanes going to be on the left side of traffic, or are they both going to be on the south side the way you did 52 and 55?
Eileen, you should speak to that.
These are both along the left side.
Left side, great.
For 39th Street, it's on the south curb, and 38th Street, it's on the north curb.
Excellent. My concern is I work on a street where we lost one lane of traffic on 55th between 9th and 10th, where we lost one lane of traffic to put in a protected bike lane, which is great for the bike lane, but now there's only one lane of traffic and there are cars parked most of the time on both sides of the street. There's a hospital 3 blocks away, and not infrequently there are ambulances that can't get through because there's no way for them to get around when there's only a single lane of traffic. Is that something that can be dealt with or that you've considered here, where only one lane of traffic is going to be left?
Right now, that's part of why we put down barrels and we aren't making people park. I think right now the volumes aren't too excessive, so we're not having that problem. But it is something, once again, as we look towards the long term, that's something very much that was tied into what we were looking at. The idea that you can't really block up these corridors too much. These are key, almost, hospital side, that is a special issue and one that we'll continue to work with, the hospital on. And this is the kind of thing that comes up with FDNY a lot. But these are like massive transportation corridors that move a lot of people to and from. So we really can't see backups there. And to make a point, it is less about the personal vehicles on the corridor and more about the fact that, like, when people have to move through there, that's got to be available. That space has got to be available. Right now, as it exists, like, we kind of feel like they'll probably just run over the barrels if they have to,
Emergency vehicles, you mean?
Yeah, hopefully. Well said, Kim. Thank you for that.
And if there is an issue, if you're seeing an issue at particular places on 52 and 50 or 55, recall that we did try to put in some no standing zones to address that issue. So if there's locations where you're seeing problems, we can always take another look at the curb regulations to see if we can make any adjustments.
The no standing zones are painted there, but there are a lot of delivery trucks that use that block for prepping their orders. And so they block all the no standing zones.
Okay. Can you just remind me again which block it was?
Sure. It's West 55th between 9th and 10th.
Okay. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you.
BJ, did you have a question?
No, actually, Nancy asked a question. I was concerned about the congestion because those two streets along with 37 is heavy traffic normally, and then during rush hour with the Lincoln Tunnel connection. So Nancy already asked a question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Nancy, do you have another question? Nancy, you're still muted.
Yeah, I know. I was trying to find the button. So I was just on 38th Street yesterday, and on the north side of the street, they've installed a very large city bike stand. That's going to, is that part of the plan? Are you aware of that?
The city bike station will currently stay in place, and at that particular location, the bike lane would function more like a regular standard bike lane and run alongside that. since currently people are not parking next to it. So we're taking that into consideration. There's no plan to remove it at this time.
Okay, the reason I'm asking is, you know, this is the garment center, and the garment center requires trucks. And while the garment center is dying, if we want to maintain the efficiency of the garment center and the vitality of it, this does remove more trucks, particularly with the bike stand. So I'm wondering what the garment center, the individual businesses, do they know this is going on, and what is their position? Because we still have a lot of trucks in that area.
I think part of the reason why we're doing this in temporary right now is that we have the need right now, and we have to be flexible for exactly the kind of things that you're talking about. I think, you know, as we've presented 52 and 55, 26 and 29, there was a lot of these kind of issues on 26 and 29. And we really did have to go out there and do a lot of work with businesses and make adjustments. Up to about 4 months ago, Eileen was still making adjustments on 55 and 52. So, you know, this is the first step. I hope this will make that easier, because they'll kind of see, all right, this is kind of what DOT is thinking about, and we'll get a picture of where those little you know, points of contention are, and we can start to address them now. I kind of feel like that's not that realistic, and we're going to have to go through this all again with you guys with the final plan, hopefully later this year.
EJ, I've got a question. I didn't.
Go for it, Jesse.
My question, and it comes from some personal experience here at my house, is whether or not the whole stretch of 38th and 39th is the same cross section that you showed in terms of having 2 moving lanes in every case, and if it's always a moving lane that's being substituted out for this bike lane, or are there any you know, sort of deviant blocks as there have been on some of the other crosstown paths?
I'm gonna throw that one to you, Eileen.
Sure. So for this this phase between 11th Avenue to 5th Avenue, there are 3 blocks that don't fit that section, and that's 39th Street between 11th Avenue and 8th Avenue. It's a little bit different there, where there's a single lane of traffic. So the rest of those blocks generally have the a parking lane on each curb with 2 moving lanes. And then there's some variations with turn lanes at different locations. As we move over to the east side, there's a lot more variation. And that's part of why this phase is pursued first. There's more continuity.
This is sort of part of the question, part comment, so excuse me for jumping a little bit around there. But so I work in Manhattan, or did when there wasn't a coronavirus, but I live in Long Island City, and I live on Crescent Street, which, you know, I know Ted is well aware is one of the streets where you guys implemented this same temporary approach. And
Eileen is also the PM on that.
Oh, great. Well, yeah, thank you, Eileen. I can certainly report from my neighborhood that the stretches of Crescent Street that have the same layout that you're talking about, with 2 moving lanes and parking on both sides, where you've removed a moving lane, it seems to be working great in that the lane is sort of self-enforcing, and I haven't seen too much trouble with the lane disappearing and people parking in it, or cones getting moved or anything like that. There are a couple blocks of Crescent, I think down here it's like between 38th Avenue and 40th, where it narrows to 1 moving lane it used to have parking on both sides, and the bike lane, the new bike lane with these same cones on that stretch takes one of the parking lanes. And that's probably a good idea. It was an underutilized parking lane to begin with, but it has become an enforcement problem, because there'll be the occasional sort of, you know, scofflaw tenant of one of the buildings that just decides that they would rather be able to still park in front of their spot than obey the new lane. And it's very, very easy for them to literally pick up the orange cones and just put them on the sidewalk and eliminate the lane at least temporarily. And that happens a lot in those couple of blocks. So, I mean, just sort of the concerns / questions, like, I think for most of the blocks, or I guess all of the blocks in our Community Board 5, it seems like it's this 2-lane setup, and that seems like it works great where I see it here in Long Island City. But I do think that on the lanes where the streets where you have less room to play with, there's an enforcement problem with these temporary lanes because some people would just rather park than follow the law.
Eileen helped me out here, but I kind of feel like the real difference here, I mean, enforcement is tough when you're putting up barrels. I'm just going to put that out there. So yes, in a normal place, I would be kicking this to enforcement. However, I think the situation that we have here and the main difference that we're seeing, and we're looking at these things a lot, is the fact that you have metered parking along here and you have a lot more vehicular movement as opposed to a lot of Crescent, how it's not metered and it's alternate side. So it's less turnover and more like people are getting it, parking in the right place, staying in the right place. You increase your possibility of scofflaws, to use your term. You know, like maybe you have something to add on that, Eileen, but that's really the way that we're looking at it. And that's why I did say that at the end here, like we're going to continue to use temporary materials and try to build this thing out as best as possible with what's given to us right now. More barrels, lines on the street. You know, I wouldn't rule out putting up some actual parking signs. That's not something that we have right now, but like these are the kind of things that we're going to explore as the agency gets back to work.
Okay. Thank you. Nancy, did you have an additional question?
Yes, I do. Are you going to mark the lane with a bike insignia? Because I was up there, saw the barrels, and I didn't know what it was. We were walking in it to stay away, to social distance and keep away from people on the sidewalks. There's a lot of sidewalk bridges on 38th Street. And so if you don't mark it, people aren't going to know what it is. And I think that's really dangerous for pedestrians, including me.
We have written bicycles in the lane at various places, but we are trying to get a template together, and that is one of the first markings that you're probably going to see out there. And thanks for bringing that up about the pedestrians. That's like, you know, it's one of these things where there is a little bit of lawlessness right now in Manhattan, and this isn't the place where you want lawlessness. There's a lot of fast moving cars and a lot of people trying to get places. And that's actually the reason why we took on such a hard corridor right now. And I want to, you know, we're catching, it's not perfect out there. I want to say this, but I do think that this is one of those places where we had to do something, and we have to do something now and quickly. And that is the point that we're at. So that's a good point. And we will be adding some bike markings on the roadway.
The problem that I encountered is that there are a number of buildings with sidewalk bridges, and that narrows the sidewalk. And there are a number of homeless people in that area who don't wear masks. And so they lean on the inside part of the sidewalk bridge and the outside part of the sidewalk bridge. And so when you walk through and they don't have masks and they're coughing, I don't know where to walk. I mean, I can't walk through the middle of them. I have to go out into the street to avoid these people, these homeless people that are coughing without their masks on. That's to me, that's a big problem.
Well, this should give you at least 7 feet of extra space to get around people. I think that that's one of the advantages here. Not to say that those people won't be walking in it as well.
I know that you said that you're continuing to add signage to clarify both the new bicycle lane and the parking lane on the other side of it. Are you seeing any parking happening right now? There wasn't like any actual parking in those photographs that you showed, or is that the kind of thing that you hope to clarify with some more signage?
I mean, I want to hear Sean and Eileen about this. I think that that's probably the #1 issue that we have right now. If you guys can add points.
Sure. So as Ted mentioned before, one of the challenges here is that there's a lot of turnover with new cars coming and going each day for deliveries. So you may have already seen there's some laminated signs we've posted that show, it says temporary parking arrangement. I don't have that in the slide here, but we can share it. Basically, it shows a cross section indicating where people should park. So we plan to add more of those so that they're more visible. We posted several on each block, but we'll post them more frequently. Another thing is that we have installed some signs on the barrels themselves, which may be visible on one of the other slides. What those are, they're large orange signs that have a car symbol and a bike symbol with a different arrow for each one that shows the expectation. So we hope to increase both of those to highlight that a bit more. And I think also some of those markings like the bike symbol or stripe can help clarify some of the expectations as well.
This is going to sound really cheesy, you guys, but I'm going to say it anyway, that part of the reason why we go to community boards on this stuff is to get the word out. And I hope that, you know, we can all start to get the message across to business owners what actually is going on out there. Because I don't think people are intentionally blocking the bike lane. I think that they're just parking their cars. Some are scofflaws, people who are just, you know, whatever. They don't really understand it. So hopefully we can get the word out a little bit better too. That's something that I really strive for.
All right, thanks. Are there any other questions from anyone on the committee? Seeing none, if any members of the public or anyone else in attendance has any question, go ahead and hit the raise hand button.
And that raise hand button is going to be in the participants panel down to the right.
Okay, well, I don't see any. If we're missing you, just kind of gesticulate wildly at the camera. But otherwise, we'll take it into our committee's business session. For any comments at this point from members of the committee. I'll kind of preface this part by saying that obviously what we saw tonight was the Department of Transportation's summary on the temporary installation that has already taken place. And I believe it was able to be set up temporarily with temporary materials without notification because it was set up without notification and under 90 days or some kind of rapid setup. Obviously, as we've been told, they plan to come back to us with the kind of fully fleshed out proposal for a permanent installation that we usually get for these types of protected bike lane reconfigurations. So, you know, knowing that that's coming and knowing that this temporary installation is already there and temporary, it doesn't immediately appear to me that there's any need for the committee or the board to take a position on this, a formal position on this right now. We certainly appreciate them coming in the middle of the crisis to bring us up to speed on what has been done and why, and to give us an opportunity to ask questions about it. And certainly folks right now who have any comments about the process or what we've seen tonight or what will likely happen should feel free to say so. I'm just kind of throwing that out there as my starting thought. But for members of the committee, if you've got some thoughts or comments, feel free to smash that raise hand button. Nancy.
My comment is, I have a comment, okay? My comment is, I don't think that 26th Street and 29th Street are anything like 38th and 39th. I had my office for many years on 28th Street, and I know that neighborhood very well. the amount of traffic on 38th and 39th Street doesn't compare at all to 26th Street and 29th Street. So I think be careful when you use that comparison, because I don't think it's a good comparison.
If we can
agree. I just want to say really quickly that it was just what I was referring to was the amount of curb regulations that we went in and changed and did alterations along the corridor, that we're having a very different approach on this. It's a totally different design than what you see down there.
Any other comments from the committee? Thanks, Nancy. I am not seeing any. So unless there are any other thoughts from the committee or any other suggestions, I think that probably wraps it up for this topic. Definitely want to thank you folks from the DOT for coming in tonight, for appearing on Zoom tonight with us to bring us up to speed on this. Really appreciate you giving us insight into the time frame and your line of thought, and we'll definitely look forward to seeing the full-fledged proposal when you come back to us. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you guys.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks.
Okay, so and thanks, Luke, for driving that presentation. So going into our second agenda item for tonight, which, you know, as you've seen, is a broader discussion of the COVID crisis's effects on the transportation and environment of the district. As you probably surmised, this is a discussion that many committees on the board have been having to sort of present a forum, not just for us as board members, but, you know, for any members of the public who want to show up to our committee meeting and chime in as well, with their suggestions, concerns, observations, etc. We other committees have done similar things, and obviously one of the biggest, most fast-moving proposals and likely effects is going to be the outdoor dining proposal / legislation that we had a dedicated meeting about last night. That seemed to cover that topic pretty thoroughly as a tripartite committee representing most of the board. It seems like we came up with a relatively concrete path forward with the majority of the board in consensus. So what I was personally thinking for this discussion is to potentially kind of tick through and we can see if there are many comments, or if it's sort of just kind of a little bit more of a broad conversation on some other effects that we know are happening that we haven't seen concrete proposals for. Just to clarify, we have not received specific concrete proposals on some of these topics outside of the bike lanes that you just saw, the closures for pedestrianization that the city has already, and again, relatively quickly made on their own after several groups, including us, endorsed the concept. And then, of course, the outdoor dining legislation and proposal that we are drafting a letter for based on the discussion last night. The other topics that it's occurred to us that we could, you know, simply discuss and talk about our observations on are whether or not there's essentially four as far as I can tell, and certainly if there are other suggestions, folks can bring them up as well as part of our discussion. But there's bike lanes outside of the two new temporary lanes that we've just seen. Whether or not what we're seeing is sufficient, whether we've seen any other effects or installations, that's number one. Number two is those pedestrianizations we talked about. As far as I understand, it's been mostly Broadway, and then Irving Plaza in our district. Thirdly, intercity buses. You know, I think they've essentially been shut down, but some of them are talking about restarting their services and the effects that folks lining up on the sidewalk again would have during COVID. And finally, bus lanes. It happened very late this afternoon, but I believe the borough president issued a letter calling on the city to not slow down the installation of new dedicated bike lanes. Those are just some of the topics that it seems that there are COVID effects on, which again, we haven't received specific proposals on. So I wanted to give folks an opportunity to either folks on the committee or members of the public to speak up with concerns or questions that they have, or any suggestions about any action or opportunity for hearing from the community that we would maybe want to be taking on some of those topics or other topics if folks had them at the forefront of their mind. So sorry, with that little introduction, and unless someone has another suggestion, I figured we could simply run through those and see if there are any comments or concerns. And then, of course, if there are any other topics, we could probably cover those as well. You know, we just saw a presentation about 38th and 39th, the new bike lanes on 38th and 39th Street. Have there been any other meaningful effects or proposals on any of the other bike lanes in the district? If anyone wanted to bring up any concerns around effects on bike lanes.
You've got a raised hand.
Jordan, go for it.
Thanks, EJ. Not about bike lanes, but I wasn't sure if I heard you. I don't have a proposal for this, but I have a concern about subways and what that looks like when we're at full capacity again, and there are probably 30 issues with cleanliness in subways and the homeless population and just congestion in general, the use of subways by our frontline workers, and it's just a concern of mine. I don't have any particulars there.
That's logical, and other people have voiced that concern as well. I don't have an answer on it, and I have not heard any kind of concrete proposal on it. And when the mayor was asked about it today, he said something along the lines of, people will make up their own minds and we'll figure out a plan when we have to figure out a plan. I don't know if anyone else has heard anything other than that. If you have, feel free to offer that up.
EJ, just to add to that, no, I haven't really heard any other plan. Sarah Feinberg has spoken a couple of times recently where I've seen her interviewed. She's the interim head of New York City Transit, and she has indicated that social distancing will be impossible on the subway and that people will have to assess their risk tolerance. I agree with Jordan and EJ, just so you know, Jordan, EJ and I had spoken about this earlier today. One of the things that the borough board president is concerned about is the abandonment of express and emergency bus lanes. And it may be that part of the discussion about how the subway operates in our district and how people who are needing to get around are able to get around might be something that's more easily focused on the fact that if bus service gets cut back, that's going to be obviously placing more pressure on the subways. I think there are lots of sort of equity issues around people from outside the community board coming in who work in this district, people who are everything from housekeepers to home care aides to grocery store workers. And my concern is similar to yours, Jordan, which is that the subways are going to get exceedingly crowded, and that bike lanes and pedestrianisation are fine for people who live and work in the neighbourhood and need to do it on a temporary basis or can generally work from home. I'm very concerned about what happens when people need to actually attend work on a daily basis and are forced into overcrowded subways. I too don't have any other information or an answer to it, other than maybe one of the things we can do is back Gail's assessment that we should not be cutting back on bus service due to budget cuts at this particular moment.
Thanks, Sam. You know, I suppose the other thing that could happen that there's been some data of already is that if former commuters are beginning to go back to work but are avoiding the subway, I'm curious whether we're going to see an uptick in traffic and congestion, which would be bad, and which, of course, if we've started closing our streets for things like outdoor dining and pedestrianization, we could end up potentially in a situation where we have more traffic than we did before and even less street space than we did before, which, you know, again, I don't have a solution, but certainly one mitigation would be to focus on offering more bus service. So in that particular situation, as Sam said, there could be an opportunity to back what the borough president, you know, again, a position that we kind of just saw like an hour ago. Ryan Whalen?
Yes, so I likewise I'm concerned about what Jordan mentioned, and to think back to a lot of what George has exhorted us to do is I think we need to think comprehensively about what's happening and understand obviously that the knee bone is connected to the hip bone and all of this. It just feels like that's especially so now because of the implications of EJ, what you just described. You close a street for dining and then suddenly you increase traffic even further on other streets and so forth. And so I think personally, I agree with you with this idea of supporting what the borough president has said about mass transit and not cutting things like bus service. But additionally, and I know I talked a little bit about this last night, I think we really need to demand as much near real-time data as we can about what's happening on these blocks. I mean, we ourselves will see that just in our own observations, of course, but I think for us to have something behind that and have some way to honestly judge and assess what's happening, and to get that quickly. And it's not something that we're going to get in October or November, for us to be able to get that sooner rather than later. And then the other thing is that, you know, some number of these things are what other cities are facing and dealing with. There are organizations like NACTO, which is the National Association of City Transportation Officials. They have a full resource hub online. I'll share it out to the group with that, where transportation officials from around the country are putting forward the different kinds of solutions and ideas that they're trying in their cities. And we should at least look at those to see if any of them feel appropriate in parts of our district as they're wrestling with similar things like this. And so for us, I hope that we'll continue to look at resources like that to be responsive here.
Yep, thanks for that. I definitely agree with the need to kind of have access to real-time data. As hard as we know it is to get like modeling and data about the future of the street network in normal times, it seems like it's probably 10 times harder now. There's really no clear sense of what's going to happen, and from my point of view, it seems like the most important thing is to be able to adapt, leave options open and adapt quickly if particular forms of transportation end up getting used much more than others and impede others. You know, one of the I think it's good that one of the criteria that we talked about yesterday in terms of focusing on what streets to close for things like outdoor dining is to make one of the criteria that it helps the most restaurants as possible while minimizing the traffic disruption as possible, because we really have no idea what direction the traffic is going in, either in terms of commuters or black cars or buses. So I agree. Well, you know, just we're touching on a bunch of different things here, such as expedited bus lanes, such as the bike lanes that we talked about before. The pedestrianization that has taken place so far. Again, it's happened in a couple tranches. It's happened quickly, usually with like 1 day of notice, where the city will announce new blocks and then they'll be closed the next day. I don't know if folks have heard anything so far. I would say it's what I've heard is a generally favorable response, where it doesn't seem to have caused traffic Armageddon in any way, and people are benefiting from the closed blocks. Certainly would be interested to hear if other people are having different experiences. And you know, I'm curious as to, now that there's a focus on earmarking streets for outdoor dining, if this legislation begins to move forward, I'm curious if they will pause earmarking streets for pedestrianization, or if they'll keep moving forward, and or if any of the current pedestrianized streets or anything new that's pedestrianized at this point would get converted from pedestrianization to outdoor dining, if and when we got to that point. You know, I know that's a string of ifs, ands, and buts, but just some of the things that I'm curious about kind of peering into the future. I'm not sure if there are other thoughts or suggestions on pedestrianization at this point, but it seems something worth bringing up since it's been in progress. Finally, the last thing that occurred to me and Sam is this issue of intercity buses. They seem to have paused their curbside pickup entirely, but they seem to be talking about restarting it to some degree. The notion of however many people would fill up a megabus all crammed into a line on the sidewalk where other people are trying to pass is sort of terrifying at this point. It seems like something we should be aware of. Not 100% sure what leverage we have now that there's already, say, a bus stop there. But certainly something we should be aware of, and you know, would be interested to find out if anyone's seen any of those experiences or has any thoughts on it. But you know, that would be the fourth of specific topics, again, outside of outdoor dining, that it seems like there will be concrete effects on. So if anyone has thoughts on those or any other topics they wanted to bring up, I'd say, you know, this is a good time, and then certainly we can kick it to one of the 4 members of the public if they want to speak up as well.
Can anyone hear me? I just don't find the
yeah, we can hear you, George. Yep.
Oh, anyway, just 2 or 3 things. We have 2 large railway terminals in our district, Grand Central and Penn Station. Scott Stringer proposed having the commuter rail lines better serve city stations by having an integrated fare. This was about 2 years ago. I think we should ask him to revisit that issue, because it would really be very helpful to have these sleeping giants of mobility be better used. The second point I thought would be worth bringing up is that intercity buses, I think most of us would prefer that they went into the Port Authority bus terminal. Right now, the bus terminal is a far cry of what it could be carrying, since so I think we really need to bring that up again and say, just, can't we put 2 or 3 pieces together in a coherent way? End of rant. Sorry.
Oh, those both sound like good suggestions, George. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other comments from the committee? Anything from the? Oh, I'm sorry, Ryan.
One more quick thing, just in another topic, not so much that I have a comment on it, is I expect that we'll see further requests around no standing zones and other sort of removals of individual or multiple parking spots for various reasons, whether it's different kinds of businesses wanting to do, curbside provision of their goods, or if businesses want to, carve out a little more space. And so I just imagine that's something that we've already heard a lot of, and it's continued to be harder and harder to understand how to take a consistent position on. I just feel like that's going to be accelerated even further on this. And so just getting ready to think about those questions, I think, will be an important thing for us.
This is BJ, and following up on what Ryan said, I live on 37th Street, and with the Hudson Yards having gone up, especially on the weekends when it was normal, it was very hard to find parking around here as it is, 37, 38, 39. Even at nighttime after 7 p.m., it's very hard to find parking because there's a nearby police station that takes up chunks of the block. So I think, having the bike lane and is all good, but I am concerned about parking availability for, tenants, people who live around this area on 38, 39, and then also hopefully when we open up again, that, tourists who are coming to Hudson Yards and all are going to have a really hard time finding parking.
Okay, thanks. I wanted to throw it open to any of the members of the public, other folks who are in attendance, if there are any comments.
The raise hand button should be at the center of the screen at the bottom.
So I'm open to suggestions from the committee at this point. In terms of something actionable that we could do, and again, obviously as a joint committee, we're writing that letter on the outdoor dining proposal as was discussed last night. I wanted to kind of, and I will not read the whole letter that we received about an hour ago, but I wanted to give you the gist of what the borough president sent to the mayor. I guess it was stated yesterday, saying, Mayor de Blasio, we write to oppose your Better Buses program funding cuts for fiscal 20 and fiscal 21, and to request that your administration fast track the rollout of 40 miles of emergency bus lanes across the 5 boroughs. While your administration has made significant progress towards improving bus speeds in the last several years, ironically, the biggest improvements have come during COVID-19. Bus riders, perhaps more than any other transit users, deserve priority now. They're statistically likely to be lower income and therefore less able to afford costly transition to personal vehicles. The 7 miles of currently planned lanes is too small to offset the impending transportation crisis. DOT should heed the calls of Transit Center and National Transportation Foundation and expedite and expand upon its own 2021 commitments by agreeing to install 40 miles of bus lanes per year. So essentially, the borough president is opposing the cuts in the planned expedited bus lanes and calling for, even faster implementation than before. If depending on what folks think, it was suggested that we could support this. We could certainly support it in the form of a letter, as we've supported some of the borough president's calls in the past. Certainly open to anything else actionable that folks might suggest tonight. This letter was actually signed by the Manhattan, Brooklyn, Bronx, and Staten Island borough presidents. Matt.
It seems really difficult for us, or at least I'll speak for myself, for me to come to a sort of an informed point of view on which of these actions make sense. We don't really have a sense of what the plans are going forward, whether that's with, you know, what social distancing will look like on buses, what streets will be open. It seems like there's those four sort of items you laid out before, whether it's where people can walk, where restaurants can be totally open in the street, where people can drive, where buses will be able to operate, without having any like data or even any plan for how the data will be sort of like what the feedback loop will look like. How should we think about opining on it?
I think that's fair, and I think it would be totally justifiable for us to like keep our powder dry in the absence of specific proposals. Certainly there's this letter from the four borough presidents. We could endorse that if we wanted, or we could say nothing about it. You know, one other thing that we are often on record saying, even in good times, is that inner city buses picking up on the sidewalks are an incredibly troubling part of the district, and they should be moved into the Port Authority bus terminal. It would not be unprecedented for us to reiterate that, particularly when bus lines, particularly when some inner city buses are planning on spinning up again, and most of the Port Authority bus terminal seems to be empty because the other bus lanes aren't using it right now. Sorry, bus lines. So, you know, those are, for example, two actionable things. I agree that in the absence of other proposals or other data, it's very difficult to, you know, coalesce around some sort of recommended action. So I would totally agree, and there's certainly no rush or need for us to, you know, particularly form up and take any particular position tonight. Hearing not a lot of enthusiasm or specific plans. Chris Clark, go ahead.
Chris, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So I was just going to suggest, or rather say that I would be supportive of us writing a fairly generally worded letter in support of what the borough presidents put out, acknowledging that we don't really have details, no one has details yet, but what we do have are values, and articulating what our values are as they relate to public transit infrastructure. I think we could do fairly concisely and without necessarily cutting off options for other actions that we can take as more details become available.
You know, that makes some sense to me. It certainly doesn't have to be a long or labored letter. We could simply say that we agree with the points that she makes. I know, I guess, do we still have Vicky in attendance? If Vicky has some thoughts on obviously we're writing a letter coming from 3 committees and potentially you, Vicky, as well, in regards to the outdoor seating. You can let us know whether or not it might be a good idea to have another letter in relative to these expedited bike lanes, or better to to focus our attention on one issue. I'm just kind of curious what perspective you might have, Vicki.
A couple of things. This just came out from Gail this afternoon, correct? Or from all of them this afternoon. So
Yes.
they haven't really asked for support. They may be doing that, so we should be prepared in case they'd like to have us support it. I like Chris's idea, which is to, you know, base it on not really taking a position on anything, but supporting the overall concept and then wait for more details to come along. I think that's a good idea. I think it's important that the Transportation Committee be on record for some of the issues that were not brought up at all last night, because that was on outdoor dining. So it makes sense to me if you guys feel, you know, if the committee as a whole believes that and agrees with Chris, I would definitely go along with it.
Any other strong thoughts from members of the committee? Matt.
So I have one other question. It seems like the support for outdoor dining and the support for expanded bus lanes are in competition with each other in a way, right? Because a street can't be one if it's the other. Maybe that's not true just because the bus lanes are already sort of defined. Is it worth us sort of communicating where we think the priorities are? I don't know that we know that, but sort of how we stack rank some of this stuff. Or they're not as in conflict because they're not considering outdoor dining what the bus lanes are.
I think we certainly would just kind of need to see whether or not they could be configured so that they're not in competition. But it's something that we could mention in both of our in for example, our support of outdoor dining. We're kind of already saying as one of our criteria that areas should be prioritized that minimize the disruption to the traffic network, maximize the number of restaurants we can help while minimizing disruption to the traffic network. We can also similarly say that you know, we're in favor of the expanded bus lanes, the expedited bus lanes, as long as they don't impede you know, the potential for expanded pedestrian and dining capabilities. You know, I think it's probably enough to mention it in each of those letters at this point, but without like seeing again a comprehensive plan where one wins out over the other. I don't know that we necessarily need to choose one as a priority.
Thanks.
Yeah. You know, the other thing that occurs to me is that we could, and we've done this before by email. I think we're getting decent at just communicating virtually. We could wait a couple of days, Vicki, to let the letter that kind of was just released today play out. See if the borough president asks us specifically for support or adds some more context to the letter itself. And, you know, in 2 or 3 days at the beginning of next week, if that does appear to be the case, we can simply sync up as a committee by email, again, as we've done in the past, simply make sure that our position and our support is sort of the same, hasn't changed from tonight, and then simply write the same brief letter, you know, at that point, if that sounds okay.
Yeah, that sounds good. The thing that I'd like to mention, just for everyone to keep in mind, is, okay, last night's meeting was 3 committees, but it was specific in its subject, and that was outdoor dining. So our other committees, with the exception of landmarks, because landmarks is not affected by COVID, but land use and BEX BEX has already met and will be putting together either a letter or a position or all of their concerns and thoughts vis-a-vis the issues that BEX deals with, education, city services, and so on. And land use will be doing the same. So you might want to think about transportation, because it's such an important component, and maybe putting something together in terms of all the issues that were brought up this evening, even before the question of the buses. It's just a thought, and I'm not sure everyone knew that each of our committees are going to be doing that. And the 3 committees from last night, I'm not sure what Parks will be doing, but it was basically it was only dealing with outdoor dining. So just keep that in mind. But I leave it up to the committee. I'm okay with whatever you guys, feel comfortable with.
Yeah, I'll throw that to the committee. We talked about a number of issues here, but I think one of the main morals of the evening was that we don't have hard and fast proposals or for example, priorities to prioritize at the expense of any others. Nancy?
So we're also known as the Environment Committee. I don't know what we're doing on environment, but I don't recall that we've done much lately. And I think my concern is as the city's funding is reduced, more and more environmental supportive programs are going to go by the wayside and be tagged as too expensive, like the recycling, the organic recycling program has stopped because it's too expensive for the city. And there will be other things that will, I'm afraid, will be abandoned. And I think we need to think about that part of our committee as well.
That's a good point. Also, EJ, I mentioned last week that the borough president, and those of you who were at the full board meeting, will remember that Gail made it a point to say, we want to hear from Community Board 5. She said it 3 times. So I thought that the best way to do that would be, instead of a committee, something from the board as a whole, I thought it would be better to hear from the individual committees in some way, shape, or form. But you and I, EJ, have discussed the fact that this is really early on, and we don't have data, and we don't have a lot of the information. But we should keep this in mind, I think, and not let it go on too long before we do something or say something.
Yep. We can certainly, in the way that you're saying that other committees are, we could certainly write a letter discussing the topics that we've talked about tonight. I think it would largely be framed as where I apologize, I'm just kind of making notes as I say this. Obviously, we're looking for data and reporting, as we mentioned, through all the different parts of this process, so that we can understand what's happening, so that the city and we can respond to ongoing conditions, because that's going to be much more valuable than predicting what's happening. So I think we could certainly focus on that. We could mention what we talked about, which I think has a lot to do with the interplay of pedestrianization, the outdoor dining, just as an issue that is related to street use and how the street use ultimately gets allocated, as well as bike lanes and bus lanes. As was talked about, we don't have hard and fast new proposals for those other topics, but that we'll be watching closely to see how they are balanced by the committee and how the data is presented and how the city is able to continue to adapt to that. We could certainly refer to that. While we're at it, we can, as I mentioned, issue our concern about intercity buses and the fact that there may be both the opportunity and the, more so than ever, the need to say that they should operate out of the bus terminal as opposed to further congesting the streets.
Actually, I was just thinking that Well, just so that you know, Bex did not have answers, but they will be putting together all of their concerns and their thoughts. And what I usually do, for those of you who don't know, at the borough board meeting, which is always held after exactly 1 week after our full board meeting, it's the third Thursday of the month, I always report on what each committee has been doing. So I'm thinking of this from my own standpoint. It would be very helpful for me to have something that I can say, these are the things that our T&E committee is concerned about, dealing with, trying to figure out, waiting for information, whatever it is. It would help me to have a report, because I like to be able to report what each of our committees are doing. So just from that standpoint, it would be helpful, and it doesn't have to go out if the committee doesn't feel that this is something that we put forward. It would be just for me to be able to report on what's been going on with at the committee level.
Then I think it could be appropriate to put this together as a sort of readout of this discussion, and again to emphasize what our areas of interest are, particular to the need for data and reporting, ongoing reporting from the city, the need for, with the lack of a comprehensive street use plan to look at, the understanding of the interplay between all the things we talked about: pedestrian areas, dining areas, bike lanes, bus lanes, our support for the expedited bus lanes as long as they don't interfere with XYZ, and the need to put intercity buses in the appropriate spot. If there aren't objections, we can certainly craft a readout around that discussion from tonight.
Okay.
There are some hands raised.
Okay,
Nancy?
can I say one last thing?
Yeah.
Thank you. Last night, after the discussion by the 3 joint committees, I stayed on for the public safety discussion on an issue they had. And I just want to tell everyone, I was able to tell the Public Safety Quality of Life Committee, the emails and texts that I started to get from people who had been on, not just electeds, but the bid representatives, one person said, I stayed on for 2 hours to listen to Community Board 5 because I was enthralled with the discussion, the level of thought and questions and comments that come from this board. I'm sorry I had to leave after 2 hours. And this is common. I get this all the time. So even if we don't have positions, people want to hear from us because we have a good reputation. I sound like a broken record, but we do. We are a professional board. They want to hear from us because they feel that we really have thoughtful dialogue, and it's very helpful, obviously. I just wanted everyone to know I was kind of blown away by the response. I thought it was wonderful.
Okay, so the comment that I wanted to make was, we don't know what's coming, but we can all observe where we are right now. We can observe the current conditions, a variety of things. Like, I've ridden the subway recently, and it smelled of disinfectant. It's very disinfected. I walk up 7th Avenue twice a week, Wednesdays and Fridays, from 16th to 39th Street. So I'm observing things as I'm going along. And there are trends that I see that are changes that are happening. Some are good and some aren't so good. So I believe that we can all observe what's going on and see what's happening and kind of report back to Vicki our concerns based on our observations. So that's I think a direction that we could go in.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Jordan.
Thanks. I have a process question. So the borough president sent this letter, the borough presidents sent this letter to the mayor. Is it likely that he responds to this in some way? Or does this get filed somewhere and he goes along his merry way?
I think you could probably find examples of both. The borough president can certainly start discussion in a very effective way. And as you'll recall, less than 2 months ago, the borough president sent a letter saying that I think it was probably after some city council folks had floated the idea of pedestrianizing streets. The borough president made it more concrete by calling specifically for Broadway from Chinatown to Central Park to be closed. And when the city finally chose streets to close in our district, we signed on and endorsed that particular stretch of Broadway. And when it came time when the city actually did close streets, the streets that they closed in our district were Broadway. So, it's sort of like reading tea leaves, because would they have done that anyway? were they specifically reading the community input from the borough president and from community boards like us? It's difficult to tell, but it certainly seems to be able to trigger and guide the broader conversation.
Right. That's what I hope happens. But I guess I'm a little concerned with the mayor's what will be approach to some of this, and not to get political or anything like that, but that gives me pause. I'll put it that way.
Vicky, I don't
so
know.
And that goes to the broader conversation about what we can do. And waiting a month to our next meeting, I think, is a mistake. So I fully endorse if we want to put a letter together now, if we want to over email say, hey, what do we think? See what maybe some of this feedback was, or some of the results of the borough president's letters, and go from there. But I think it's going to be an iterative process. I'm concerned about waiting too long. That's all.
Got it. Thank you. Matt.
So I agree with Jordan, and I wanted to flag that I also agree with Christopher's earlier statement. It sounds like we're kind of coalescing around the idea of saying something like, the response to COVID happens to or coincides with a lot of the things that the Transportation Committee has put priorities of our committee. And so to the extent that it accelerates those things, here are those things, and we can talk about prioritizing bus, prioritizing bike lanes, the things that we've talked about in the past. So I'd be supportive of us having a letter or giving Vicky those bullets to communicate.
Okay, thanks. Nancy?
It's interesting that the mayor never sends a representative to Community Board 5. The electeds that do send representatives to Community Board 5 are interested in what we think. So if the mayor isn't sending us a representative, I don't think he cares what we think. But I think the speaker cares what we think. Corey Johnson cares what we think. Brad Hoylman cares what we think. All of the people that come either in front of us or send their representatives do care what we think. And I think that's where our strength comes from.
I agree. And it's not quite the same as getting a representative from the mayor, but certainly having the ear of DOT, which is the city agency that we interface, that governs our purview most closely, and being able to have such a good relationship with Ed Pinkar and Colleen and the representatives like the folks who came tonight asking us what we thought and promising to come again, that is encouraging. And I do believe that they listen when we talk. Okay, so I do also think that we're coalescing around a plan of action here. I think we can write a letter that is a readout along the lines of what Vicky was talking about, something that she can bring to Borough Board, something that says, as folks have mentioned, that the COVID response happens to, in many ways, coincide with our priorities and things that this committee has weighed in on in the past, bike lanes and bus lanes, et cetera. that we're particularly interested in keeping an eye on data and getting reporting from the city on status as the emergency continues to go forward, that we're focused on the interplay between all of the proposals and adjustments that are being made, like pedestrianization, dining, bike lanes, bus lanes, expanded bus lanes, etc., and that we don't think they should be done in silos, that they should be integrated as much as possible, as much as is feasible in an iterative and conversational way. And then finally, that we are also interested in environmental factors, as was mentioned. How does that kind of letter sound to everybody? And would folks mostly be behind writing that up and making that available for Vicky to read out to Borough Board and et cetera? Cool. Seeing thumbs ups. That's great. All right then. That sounds good. We can move forward on that. We'll also keep our eye on the specific issue of the expedited bus lanes. Like we said, we can see if the borough president asks us to specifically weigh in on that. It can be part of this larger readout. And then if anyone tells us that some sort of direct or targeted letter specifically supporting that would be helpful, that's something we can just we can hammer out by email, since it's just a part of that larger letter. All right, well, great, thank you. Anything else from anyone else before we wrap it up?
Just a thank you from me.
Thanks, Vicky. All right, well, thanks a lot, everybody. That will conclude. Yes.
Folks don't have to stay, but I missed the vote. If there was a vote on the 38th and 39th Street lanes, I was here for most of the discussion. I'd be happy to add my vote now that I'm back.
Okay. There was not a vote because we got a presentation on the temporary stuff they've already done, and we're still waiting on a fully fleshed out proposal for their permanent installation.
Cool. All right.
All right. Thanks very much, everybody. Enjoy your evening.
Be well,
Appreciate
stay
it.
safe. Bye.
Bye-bye.
CJ.